welcome to another episode of the AgNext podcast, where we talk to you about all things sustainability and animal agriculture. Today we've got Dr. John Ritten with us, an agricultural economist who's on the team here at AgNext, and he's going to join us and tell us a little bit about his career today. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me.
It's perfect.
This
You're
looks
doing
like going to be a fun episode. So, John, we welcome again. So, we always like to start asking people to tell about where they're from, a little bit of your background, and how did you start with agnext and ag economics, basically.
It's a long story. Brief background is I grew up in western South Dakota, right? So spent 18 years there shoveling snow, being cold. And so I graduated from high school and promptly moved to the desert down in Yuma, Arizona. So spent about 10 years in the Southwest, went to Arizona Western College, Arizona State, New Mexico State, and I actually came back here to the fine institution we're at today at CSU for a PhD. And then transitioned up north to Wyoming. I was up at the University of Wyoming for about 15 years before I was lucky enough to come down here and work with this great team at agnext.
Good.
John, I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit what it's been like for you coming back to your alma mater to be a researcher now and working here. What's that been like for you?
It's interesting. There's been a lot of change in the 15 years I was gone. The campus is bigger. It's been a lot of renovation. Looking across the way here at the building I used to be housed in as a student. And then just the resource base here, and it's been the community at large is great. I mean, there's just so much involvement, so much engagement with industry and just, stakeholders across the state. It's been great.
So, John, what is specifically what was your major like, and how did you choose to work with that? How did you ended up in being here like that? I'm curious to see how a guy from South Dakota went to the desert, and were you exposed to agriculture growing up? What made you interested in that?
Yeah. So you would think I had a plan when I started out my life. That really wasn't the case. So both of my parents were involved with ag back in Minnesota. By the way, the Twins just won their first playoff series in 21 years. So go Twins.
Oh, okay. Time to celebrate.
Actually 21 years. And so they were both all my grandparents were farmers back in Minnesota. And so I was exposed that way. In fact, my uncle still is on the family farm that my mom was raised on. But they were both school teachers out in Rapid City. And so I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, which I think a lot of college students probably are. So actually my first degree is a general studies degree. And
which degree?
General studies, associate's degree at Arizona Western.
Cool.
So I could go to school for 2 years on a scholarship and get all the general credits done basically, and then save my kind of what I wanted to dive into when I transferred to a 4-year school, which I did. I actually wanted to be an artist. Of all
Really?
things. Yeah.
Like painter, musician?
Yeah, it was like drawing mainly. So like a lot of like chalk and charcoal stuff.
Very cool.
You still doing
really hard to make a living at it. So that's where I transitioned to be a marketing major at ASU.
But still somewhat art-related,
do artsy stuff and get paid, and it didn't actually pan out quite that way because no one, I don't think, tells you when you get a marketing degree that that's code for sales. And so
Sure.
I was actually in sales for a while. In industry, I was in insurance. I was in industrial sales for a while after my bachelor's degree. And decided I wanted to go back to school for a while. And so I actually went and got an MBA at New Mexico State, which is one of the schools I was going to go to for my undergraduate degree. But I had some family in Arizona, so I went to go stay with them for my first 2 degrees. And then I went through an accelerated program. It was 10 months to get an MBA, and I wasn't quite ready to go back and work. So I just started shopping around for schools, and CSU had a natural resource economics degree. And that was one of, I think, 3 or 4 places that accepted me with funding. And so, to be honest, it was a really good place to live. I'm looking at the mountains right now, right? And so that's geography played a role. And then the intersection of agriculture and natural resources is just really intriguing to me, right? Because we all need to eat. We all have to rely on natural resources, for recreation, as well as preserving it for the next generation. I think we're all kind of caretakers, right, of our natural resource base. And where those two kind of fields intersect has always been interesting to me. And the degree I got here really kind of helped me turn that into a career. And that's what I've kind of focused on ever since.
Why you decided to go back to school? You were in sales, was because you decided to do the MBA, and then what were you inspiring something? Be a teacher like your parents were, or something like that? What made you go back to school? I'm sure that's not an easy decision, but probably this prior experience to the industry also helped you when you came back to school.
Yeah, on the reason I went back to get an MBA, honestly, was because it was a faster rated promotion, right? I could have a more successful career. But then after another year of that, I realized I didn't want to just be in a corporate office for the rest of my life, and I wanted to do something else, and that's where I started to explore out. So the natural resource economics was one degree I was admitted to here, as well as University of Nebraska-Lincoln, but other places that have, kind of green accounting and more kind of social sustainability issues. So I was really just kind of putting feelers out to see what would be maybe more compelling than just making money. So I never really had any goals of being a teacher, to be honest. It was more about research. I've always liked learning more than teaching. I don't think I'm necessarily very good at teaching. So
You are.
I'm not sure about that, but it's just a desire for knowledge, I think, once I'm in academia, it's just a great place to be. Because I get to be surrounded by really smart people.
So, John, I'm curious if you can talk to us a little bit about, so you have your PhD in natural resources, and what was the other part of it?
Natural resource economics.
Economics. Okay, got it. I thought so, and I was going to say ag, and I was like, I don't think you said ag. Anyway, so I'm curious to know kind of what your interest is and where you see the cross sections of sustainability and animal agriculture, and then also kind of folding in the economics piece of that too. How does that show up for you, and what are your your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's where it all gets fun, right? Because it gets messy. It's hard, right? There's a lot of unknowns, and it's really hard to have an impact on a lot of the natural resources we use, specifically with extensive agriculture. And so, again, my degree is in natural resource economics, but my job at the University of Wyoming was agricultural systems specialist. So I did a lot in the applied ag space, right? But I always had kind of an eye for how does this interact with our natural resource base. And so animal agriculture is, to me, more fun than row crops, just because we have less control, right? It's more extensive, specifically, in places where I grew up in western South Dakota specifically, and in the state of Wyoming and even the Southwest, right? There's a lot of range-based, right, animal operations. And it's difficult, but it also means it's fun because there's challenges, right? I like challenges. And so trying to figure out how we get through today, but also planning for the future. And then the sustainability piece is not just the sustainability of operation, but also, right, communities and people, right, as well as environmental or ecological. And to me, the economics really is the intersection of all those. And how do we make decisions with understanding trade-offs, right, between each three of those kind of parts of the land grant stool. And that, to me, it's really, again, trying to explore and just get new knowledge on how the system works and how it evolves over time, and where we have levers that we can maybe push the system one way or another based on different societal needs and goals.
That's interesting. So on that line, is there you recently moved to CSU? When was that? A couple of months ago?
About a year ago. It was last October. Yeah.
Last October. So you've been here for a year. And what are some of the research that you've done or you are doing in that direction? And just I know John is probably one of the most productive people in our team, and he works a lot. He does a lot of things. But what is the one that excites you most? And we can talk about others too. But
it's like trying to have me pick between my kids, right? I don't have a favorite. It depends on the day, I think, and what data we have available and what cool questions are. But anything from like wildlife interactions with prairie dogs, sage grouse, water issues, both quality and quantity, climate adaptation, climate mitigation. Those are all important aspects. Recreational impacts. We're doing stuff now with even energy development on rangelands in conjunction with livestock production. So also, I think anything that can get people to ask better questions is something that interests me. So we're doing a lot of work now with optimal timing for specifically yearling cattle, working with our great partners at ARS just down the road here, looking at can we market our animals at different times of the year and have better financial as well as ecological outcomes, right? And so getting people to ask better questions, I think any research that gets us down that road is exciting to me.
Is there anything is there a better time to be marketing cattle or?
The only answer from an economist has to start with it depends, right? And so it depends
literally
on your goals and your
everything.
operations.
It depends.
Yeah. And so, it depends on the year, right? So that's the other really fun thing about animal agriculture is every year is different. And so you try to look at trends and kind of figure out where we think the market's going to go in the next 6 months to 18 months. But looking at historical data, we would do better marketing a little bit earlier in this part of the country, at least, just because feedlot demand is a little bit higher. And if we can get our animals to market before the plateau or drop off of those seasonal fall prices, we would do better in terms of profitability, as well as probably give our range a little bit of a much needed rest after a pretty short growing season compared to other parts of the country.
That's interesting. That's pretty cool. Yeah. You've done a lot of research too, like you mentioned, looking historical data, and the other day you gave a pretty nice presentation to a group of people who were visiting us. Is there anything that you should expect on the cow-calf sector? I mean, I think you've explored a lot the data, but the future, what are the biggest, or what are the changes that you think is going to happen based on historical data? Is there something that you can see?
Yeah, and so, again, we could talk for hours on this.
You're here for that.
No. I think just some general takeaways is that we're starting to see breeding cows migrate towards the middle of the country, right? And so migration towards the Great Plains, and we start to see some migration north. We saw a lot of that, obviously, in the big drought in the southern plains. Some of them are starting to move back south, but I think given future climate forecasts, it wouldn't be unexpected to see more concentration of cow-calf operations and animals in kind of the central and northern Great Plains, just because of stability of forage. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the biggest challenge for cow-calf operations. Again, speaking from the regions I've been doing work in, a little different east of the Mississippi, but specifically the western United States, is that dormant season forage, right? How do we get them through, most cases, the winter without going broke buying high value feed? Mm-hmm. And so as we start to see most of the forecasts I've worked with for the next 50 to 100 years is the wet years are going to get wetter, which doesn't do us a lot of actual good because a lot of that water just runs off, right? We don't get any more grass, a little bit more, but only marginally. Mm-hmm. But the dry years also get drier. So even if we, on average, have the same annual precipitation, but we have wetter wet years and drier dry years, it's really hard for that rancher to get through those times, right? And so trying to find strategies that allow us to continue to have, right, an intact breeding herd nationally that continues to provide food for our country and the world, honestly, is important. And it's going to be a challenge to figure out how do we do that geographically as we start to see not just changes in annual precipitation, but also geographically where it falls, right? We're going to have much more spotty precipitation, and trying to figure out how we do that collectively in an industry with over 700,000 producers is probably going to be a bit of a challenge, I think.
Do you see any consolidation in the cow-calf business, increase in consolidation? Not really, because it's so diverse.
In the last 40 years, we haven't. The average herd size has gone up by one animal in the last 40 years, from 48 to 49.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So it's not like other sectors or other animal proteins. The cow-calf sector really is still.
What is the current average?
49.
49. Yeah, that's interesting. Good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I can tell by the way you've been talking about this that this is probably something that's been on your desk. You've been thinking about it. So I'm kind of curious if you can talk to us about what are your plans for like the next, we'll say 5-ish years here at Agnext and working at CSU. What do you hope to accomplish in terms of your research, things you hope to discover?
I mean, I think the sky's the limit, right? We've got a great team here, which is one of the reasons I moved down, because there's going to be some really exciting physical science going on here, and I just hope to contribute to that. So part of it depends on funding, right? And what we actually are able to do, because we have a lot of options and we're going to have to make some decisions on what actually gets funded. But I think obviously climate, I've done a lot of work on climate adaptation in my career, right? Response to drought, response to climate change, and how do we get out in front of that in terms of mitigation? And so I think the team that's assembled here and the facilities we have, it's really going to be important to look at from birth through slaughter, right? The impacts. It's too common, I think, that we focus on a single sector and don't worry so much about the leakage across sectors when we make a decision. It's one of the reasons we have such big cows right now, right? Because we've been pushing growth in the feedlot for so long that mature cow size has gotten bigger. So let's look at really the impacts across that animal's lifetime and look at the trade-offs again across those different kind of measures of sustainability, because even if we somehow get to net neutral climate impact from beef production, but the price of beef gets too high and marginalized communities can no longer afford it, that's not a win, right? So find ways that are scalable for a diverse set of producers, right? So diverse in typical demographic terms, but also in size, scale, and geography. And make sure that we have a suite of tools that producers can adopt that meet their needs as well as the needs of current and future generations. So I really think, methane is the big one of the day, but also, even though I really like animal agriculture, specifically rangeland beef productions, because they're extensive and hard and tricky, what does the ranch of the future look like? And how do we intensify that management through new emerging technologies? And not just a piece here and a piece there, but how do we design a toolbox that really involves a lot of different data, big data, right? So probably some AI and machine learning going into this to really help us better understand impacts of management, but also help manage our natural resources better to meet, again, individual and societal demands.
That's interesting. And that seems to be a lot of applied research, right? You mentioned you really like research. You can see that most everything that you do, you want to see that applied. Is that coming from the extension background as well? Like, can you tell a little bit about like your previous extension role, your extension job here at CSU, and we recently had a fall of extension people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was when I started at the University of Wyoming, it was about 50-50 research extension split. I was the first economist actually housed off campus. I was at one of our research farms.
Oh, cool.
Which I did not know what that meant, stepping into that job. It was a challenge, but it was great. And so I think that's where my personal, I like to be very applied in my work, right? Because I want to be able to actually answer questions rather than here's a theoretical, supply and demand curve and X marks the spot that we get in the Econ 101 class that is hard to translate, right, to the real world. And so I did that job at Wyoming, again, for about 15 years. I was also the director of the experiment station for a year and a half during the pandemic. So really got to interact with stakeholders across the state and see all of the work the impact that the work of land grant can have, right, on the people of the state beyond just our traditional students in a classroom, right? And just seeing the reach of the land grant university was eye-opening to me, and the people that really care are invested in what we do, right? So with that being said, I'm still a huge proponent of basic research. I mean, we used to, back in Wyoming, we would fund a lot, in my role as a administrator, fund a lot of molecular biology, for example, was in our college, right? So a lot of work that's going to see the light of day in 50 years, it has an impact, right? But without that research, that happened 30, 40, 50 years ago, even in the animal science fields, I couldn't do my job today, right? So it really is a continuum. We need all of it. I just am used to being in that space where I interact daily with stakeholders and producers. And I want to at least have something I can say. I may not be overly intelligent, but at least have an answer, right?
Yeah.
How do you see your role? Do you mind if I?
No, sure.
Just a question. How do you see your role that you're in now, and how does that fold in with extension? Is it different than the position you held at Wyoming, or do you feel like there's a lot of similarities? I'm thinking back to that 50-50.
Yeah, so I'm currently 80% outreach and engagement. So I actually have a higher component here now. So a lot of similarities, but some differences in that we have more industry partners down here at CSU. Wyoming there's only 500,000 people in total, and there's not as many, feedlots, dairies, large ag businesses that are in that state because there's just, less people, less population in general, less livestock in general. So there's a little bit more direct industry engagement, whereas before it was primarily cow-calf producers that I would work with, as well as row crop farmers. I did do a lot of row crop stuff too, where now it's probably more interaction with, dairies. I've never set foot on a dairy in Wyoming. I don't think maybe one or two, right? So I've done more here in the last year than I did in 14, 15 years in Wyoming. And that aspect, as well as I think we're just better tied into national organizations and corporate partners here just because of the size of this institution, right? Yeah. And so there's a lot more opportunity, I think, to interact with different audiences than I've had in the past.
And was the job in Wyoming your first academic position? Were you familiar with extension at all? Were you exposed to that? How was that first experience going to extension right off school? Because when I was in school, I don't remember even though my advisor was 75% extension, I didn't get exposed to extension a lot. And my previous position was also 75% extension. So how was that coming fresh from school, getting to a very intense, extensive extension position?
Yeah, it was fun. It was interesting. And so I guess, again, my family all being raised on farms, familiar with the extension, probably the thing we think of like the 1950s extension agent, right? The jack of all trades or Jill of all trades. I actually got a picture in my office of the newspaper from Fergus Falls, Minnesota. That's got my entire family, my grandfather, and my grandmother and my mom and all my aunts and uncles, because they were in the county fair, right? So they all had their projects. So like, that's what I think of as extension. And of course, as an economist, I'm coming out to Southeast Wyoming and I don't know how to do any of those things, right? So I know how to work Excel. And so it was a little bit intimidating to try to figure out how I fit in and where I can add value. And that's where I think, I've been really lucky to work with some great people over the years. Probably your counterpart up there, Steve Paisley, the beef specialist for Wyoming. Jim Kroll was the agronomy specialist. And we were all housed in that same area and having that cross-disciplinary approach where we would sit down and write grants together, but then also work on materials together. And we'd go give a 2 or 3 hour program to producers, but it wasn't, Jim would talk, then Steve, and then me, but we would all kind of create our materials together and have a very cohesive message. And I think that's where I figured out, you guys have great information, but I'm going to have them look at it from a slightly different perspective. Like, yeah, we can do that, but should we do that? Or should we do it this way instead? And what are the trade-offs, right? And so I think that's the other challenge I've always had with extension when we come to reporting, as you know, it's always, what are the impacts? How many people have changed their actions? And to me, that's a challenging metric. And
it's hard to report on.
Well, for me, I just want them to think differently, right? Like maybe you don't change anything and that's the right outcome for you.
Yep.
But I just want you to ask why, right? Why would I do this and what happens if, right? That's what I want from people. Don't do something because I said so. That's a terrible idea. But think about things, right? A little differently than you have in the past.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. So JR, the next question is can you talk about it and how does this thinking different suits to sustainability? How, you mentioned a little bit about the economic piece, but how do you see that we are a team for sustainable solutions? How does John Ritten, what do you bring to the table, and what do you think about this?
Not sure I bring a lot to the table with the team we have here, but
you
I bring a big appetite. That's what I bring to the table.
And a strong desire for coffee.
So what I think is again, when we design studies, I'll ask some maybe stupid questions, but really justify assumptions we've had, right? I think all of us have been there. We know this to be true, but we go back and look in literature. We don't actually know a lot of this to be true. It's just something that we've always believed. And so let's prove it or let's question it, right? And then, so again, when I come in and if there's a study, I want to know what happens before and what happens after that, right? So it's not just a feedlot study. How are we going to incentivize cow-calf producers to provide the inputs to that feedlot? What happens when they're hanging on the rail? What's carcass quality and quantity going to look like, right? How will we impact food supply? And so really just think, again, because I can be naive at times and really ask those questions, why do we do it this way? It's because we always have. Okay, well, let's do something different, right? And again, we're in a position, we're lucky enough that we get to ask really weird and absurd questions sometimes and figure out why things don't work and we don't go out of business, right? But we can save other people from making terrible mistakes because we can make those mistakes on their behalf, right? So I think that's another thing that, I tend to play devil's advocate maybe a little bit too much to my team at times, but I think those are the sort of questions I want to know is are we sure we can't do that or how bad is it if, right? And so really push us down that road out of our comfort zones.
That's pretty cool.
So you were talking about your extension position, and right now your position is 80% extension. And I know part of that is that you serve on a number of committees across the region or here at CSU. I'm kind of curious to know, why are these positions important to you, and how do they help to inform your work here at the university?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of those are new and a lot of those are longstanding. So some of the multi-state research projects I've been involved with for my entire career, and that's just a really good opportunity funded by USGA to get together and talk about novel ideas as groups of kind of like-minded scientists, often across disciplines. Some of the newer opportunities have come recently. So I'm on the Administrative Council for Western SARE, and so that's a really cool opportunity. They're really trying to focus more on, not more, but increase the focus on social and economic sustainability, right? A lot of SARE projects in the past have focus on that environmental, ecological side. We really want to make sure that, businesses continue to remain in business, because if a ranch goes out of business and we have a bunch of houses come in, that's not a real good solution for anyone, unless you really need a house, I guess. But also
then that land is no longer available for agricultural production. It's
or wildlife or carbon sequestration or any of the other things that we value that land for. And so, and they're also focusing more on social impacts too. So again, community security, right? And so how these rural communities evolve over time in response to that. So I think having me on that committee was one way that they can start to maybe bolster some of those other focal points when it comes to grant applications, but also kind of start to set the next 5 and 10 year goals for that organization, and how we start to fund research and how we guide maybe some of these bigger questions, I think. Also was recently appointed to the Provost Council on Engagement, which to me is really important, because engagement's one of those words like sustainability that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But to me, it really is it's more than extension. It's more than us as the land grant bringing information out to the community. It really is, instead of ending with starting with the answer, like here's the information you need, here's the answer you want. It starts with the question, right? And so help us ask better questions. So are we actually addressing the things that are important to local, regional, national stakeholders, right? But then also involve them in the research process. And just because they don't have a PhD doesn't mean they're not a lot smarter than me and know how to say things differently or look at something in a different way, right? And so really finding ways to incentivize, the faculty on this campus and beyond, right, to really be more involved in engaged scholarship. Engaged teaching is another thing. I don't currently have a teaching appointment, so I'm less involved in that space, but really make sure that we work across disciplines, right, in a meaningful way with stakeholders outside the land grant university. And so for both of those two examples, I think I also am one of the reasons I signed up for both of those is I can bring ideas back, right, to our team, our college, and our university. Like here are ways to do things that I know are important, but I don't know how to do it. And so let's learn from smart people so we don't have to reinvent it ourselves.
Yes. I think that's great. And Jared, we almost forgot to ask him a question.
Which one?
He mentioned about the challenge of defining engagement. Can you please define sustainability?
Oh yeah, we did forget that one. How do you define it?
I don't know. It's beyond definition.
Let me guess. It depends. No,
it
I'm
depends.
just kidding.
It is. And then again, if you have a room full of 100 people, there's probably 200 different definitions in that room alone. But to me, again, it goes through my lens, and the things I'm interested in is making sure that all people have access to healthy, nutritious food, right? While being good stewards of our natural resources for the next generation, and finding ways to do that works within our societal norms, right? Is going to be important.
That's great. That's one of my favorite questions, because everyone has its reason and everybody's right. That's a challenge. On moving forward a little bit now, and you mentioned things, went back to your career and things. What is something that John Ritten knows today that you wish you knew 10 years ago or when you were starting your career?
That scientists don't have all the answers, right? Like we don't know as much as we think we know. I just took a lot of things for granted, right? And so I guess, what I would tell my younger self is question everybody and question everything, right? And just find out what we know and find out what we can know.
It's funny because I take notes and one of the notes that I took here, and it's a probably a statement that you mentioned a couple of times here, is like, try to ask better questions, and asking why and asking better questions. How do you think you become a better, how do you say that, person who asks questions? You observe people a lot, but is that why? Is that how you become a better?
I'm not sure I've gotten any better at it, but
no, I think you ask good questions, but how do you think you develop that? Observe.
Like how do you get to the place where you can ask better questions?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Or
how do you move towards curious inquiry?
Yeah, you observe more. It's why we
JR
have
probably has a better answer than me. I mean,
Hardly.
I think it is, step outside of your comfort zone and take, instead of the 30,000 foot view, take a 10 million foot view, like really take a broader view. Right. And so you have to maybe be willing to give up a little bit of depth in the interim and have a broader view and really understand trade-offs. Right. So just a systems approach, right, to thinking like what are the stocks and flows and what are the levers, and really trying to, it's like when I was in junior college and played a lot of pool, right? What are the angles, right, on the billiard table? I'd never thought about before, right? And start thinking in your head and being inquisitive, and don't be afraid to be wrong, because I'm wrong a lot.
Did you have your own cue? Sorry, this is unrelated. Like
no,
one of those pool bags.
No, I was a broke college student. So
Okay.
I used the ones that were in the cafeteria.
Provided. Okay, I understand. I'm just asking.
No,
I had a question about that.
That's pretty cool. I like that answer.
So I know that we've been talking a lot about your work and different committees you've been on, and kind of your extension, your reach across the state. And so I'm curious if you can talk to us about mentorship, and how that's been part of your career, and then how do you seek that out in your current role here at agnext?
I've been lucky to have some great mentors, right, throughout, even from as a young child throughout, right? Mm-hmm. I think people that have good mentors are lucky in that regard, because not everyone does. I do think that there's a bit of a challenge in higher ed maybe in how we do mentorship, because it is a little bit different than in the corporate worlds where you're kind of groomed and you're going through those promotions. Here we got, obviously 10-year promotion packets, but it is, we're all busy, right? We're all doing our own thing. And Wyoming, I had some great mentors as well, both within, but a lot of them were across departments, because we were a small department, right? So we were one deep in everything. So I couldn't learn from the other person that did my job, because I was that person, right? And so I think that's something that we can always strive to do better at, is supporting young professionals, right, in their day-to-day. And that's something that I'm not sure how to do, but I know, again, it's one of those questions, how do we do it better, that I'm trying to seek out, and I don't have answers yet, but I think there are ways that we can do that. And as a team, we tend to, I think, here we gel pretty well. We've got some good leadership in our college and at the university level. Since I've been here, we've had some turnover, and I think, it's probably a little more stable than at Wyoming, where at one point we had 5 presidents in 6 years, right?
Oh, wow. So you're changing every year. Yeah. That's pretty quick.
And so again, we've had a new one here in my year, but it's a lot more stable here. And I think that's important, but also I think we need to reward young scientists that take chances a little bit more. It's not just publications and grant proposals.
Yeah.
It's also, we need to, and this is one reason I'm on the Provost Council for Engagement, is find ways to reward those faculty members that work across disciplinary lines. A lot of the structures at land-grant universities are going to reward Pedro for publishing in animal science-specific journals, reward me for publishing in ag econ-specific journals, whereas I think we would do better work publishing in a different journal altogether that would have different readership, right? But the incentive,
it's weighted differently.
The incentive structure isn't currently there, and that's something I think that we are the faculty, right? We have faculty self-governance to some degree. Like we can start to change those norms, right? So this is my going back to question everything. Why is it this way?
Stop doing stuff. That's what I've heard.
Yes. Yeah.
That's great.
Be smart.
Yeah,
sometimes.
exactly.
Yeah, and so that's where I think, from a mentorship perspective, that if we can get the right people to say those words and we actually change the value structure here, that we will have much more impactful work being done, and we'll get a lot more public support for the work we do, because it'll be in front of different eyes that need that work, need the knowledge that we create here.
Increasing the impact and not the numbers. Sometimes we want to have multiples, but the impact that's
yeah. So I've been through the promotion process, right? As an administrator, I can say this: I don't really care about impact factors. I care about impacts, right?
Yeah.
So I won't look at the journal metrics when I publish. I put it where I think it should go. But that's not always rewarded in our current system. And so I'm a bad mentor in that way, because sometimes I tell people not to do what is in their best interest in the short term.
I think you're going back to that guiding thing you were talking about earlier, that I really want people to ask why we do things, right? So I think you're staying true to yourself and what you're trying to do here. So
yeah, that's
very
pretty
similar.
Cool. And yeah, I was going to ask, but I think you already answered. That's the similar way that you probably mentor students and people younger people too, right?
Yeah. So when I have graduate students, it's always we. It's never me, right? We're a team of mentors. Some people think that the project is the outcome, the student's the outcome, right? I mean, I think we all share that here, right? The student is the outcome, and what does she or he need out of the process in order to get to their next life stage, whatever that journey is that they have. We can impart skills and abilities into that student through the research process, but it really is that student is the outcome, and we'll publish the results. The work's going to get done, but it really is people, right? That's why we do it.
Absolutely. That's pretty good. So talking about people, now it's your time for more to personal questions.
To learn a little bit more about you and what you do kind of outside of the walls of the institution. So curious if you can talk to us a little bit about your car collection. You have a lot of vehicles, and I feel like it comes up all the time, and we want to hear about it.
I mean, I'm going to blame my wife for half of them are hers.
We're recording.
It's fine. No, we downsized. We're down to 7 or 8 now.
Okay,
since we moved
7 or 8 cars. Okay.
Because we had more land in Wyoming. We had 20 acres and a bunch of outbuildings that so.
Places to tuck and squirrel stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's your favorite, of the 8, what's your favorite vehicle?
It depends on the day because one of them is a Harley, right? So the motorcycle is important some days, not others.
Today would be a great motorcycle day.
One benefit of Colorado is the season is a lot longer. Otherwise, I have an old International Scout. I love that one. That one's pretty sweet.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
My wife would be mad if I didn't also mention that she has a 1968 Mustang GT Fastback that her dad bought brand new. So it's technically a single family car.
What? That's a cool story.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't get to drive that one much.
Yeah.
Probably because of the way you started to answer this question. That's my guess.
And it's got the high compression 302, so speed limits are not my friend in that car. Yeah, it's fun.
Uh-huh. So does your wife also really like vehicles then? Does she kind of have the same passion for you, or is she just more on the Mustang for her?
She likes the Mustang. And other than that, it's just a mode of transportation.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
She's not upset that we downsized to get to where we are now.
Were you?
Yeah.
And that comes from your artist background? You think so? Like, is there anything else that you have collections of? Or?
I think we have 7 or 8 custom guitars in our house now.
Oh, interesting. Do you play guitar?
I make noise.
Okay.
But my brother's a Luther, and so he's given me a couple.
Cool.
Both my kids have custom guitars, so we have
really
a
cool.
lot of guitars in our house.
That's awesome.
I told you we need to create a band.
I know.
Diego plays.
Yeah, that'd be good.
JR sings.
I don't know about that.
You can play.
Better than I play.
And then I know, John, oftentimes you're on the road after work heading to a variety of sporting things. Can you tell us a little bit about your kids and how they keep you busy?
Yeah, so my daughter Ember is in middle school now, which is scary to think about. She is currently playing softball and hockey, so I think she has sports or practice or games 5 or 6 days a week. My son is in 4th grade. Talon is currently playing soccer. That one's almost done. The reason he chose soccer is because it was the shortest season.
Mm-hmm.
He's not into sports.
He is into it for the snacks.
Okay.
He's getting after it this year, though.
Your child.
Yeah, he's actually been aggressive this year. This year has been better for him. He's actually playing, but usually, like, we make him do something active. He looks at soccer is a lot easier than hockey, and they have better snacks. So that's kind of his calculus. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, they're both awesome kids that keep me busy and ask me a lot of really hard questions. That's
pretty good.
They're gonna be great scientists one day.
That's amazing.
Or artists.
I was gonna say maybe an
whatever,
artist. You never
they're
know.
both really good at art. They play cello, violin, ukulele, all that stuff. So,
yeah. Cool. That's awesome.
That's nice. So now it's a couple quick.
We're getting towards the wrap up section.
The wrap up section. Pretty questions for a quick answer. What is a book that you have read recently, or favorite book that you have, or movie, or whatever?
I think there are like 15 books on my nightstand right now. So I read a lot. I go back and forth. Actually, one in my office I'm reading right now is 10 Commandments of Business Failure, which is a really good book. So basically how to go out of business. So if you do the opposite, right, it should help. So again,
yeah, that makes sense.
Something to kind of, keep your head in the game. Elite Capture is a pretty good book by Olufemi Taiwo, which is one I currently read, and then I do a lot of light reading too. So fiction authors are C.J. Box with the Wyoming connection, because I know a lot of the actually names of people in the book. He uses
cool.
state senators as in interesting places, and also the
cool.
places in the book. And then John Sanford is another kind of mystery detective writer based out of Minneapolis again. So I know a lot of those places. So it's just a way to not think
Some
too
of
much.
those regional connections.
Yeah.
Do you have a
cool.
favorite book? Like some book that you always come back and read once in a while? Or
I mean, I do that to most of the good books. I rarely read a book. Fiction books I'll read once, but nonfiction I usually read multiple times. So
Couple times, yeah.
yeah.
that's good. Now, the food. What is your favorite food?
Favorite food?
It's seasonal, I think. Right now, like, it's just after the chili harvest, so it should be green chili. We should actually be doing this in Las Cruces. I'm just saying, like, next year.
Feedback for the producer.
Like, we should
just
do
FYI.
this on site next year. So if you've never smelt the aroma of roasting chili in the streets of Mesilla, right, or Hatch, like,
Sounds really nice, though.
yeah. So that's what I'm craving right now, because it's that season.
Let's see.
And then our final wrap-up question: what is your favorite place to visit? Or favorite place to go?
Depends on the season. Again, right now I'm itching to get to Las Cruces. We usually have one of our regional research meetings in Las Cruces in the fall to coincide with at least chili harvest. If we push it back too late, you also get pecan harvest, and fresh pecan pie is also delicious. Otherwise, it's really anywhere in the mountains with trees is where I like to go. Right, so that's one reason that Colorado is a great state and Wyoming is a great state. And I grew up again in the Black Hills of South Dakota, so it's just that's where I would go to get away from people, is just walk into the woods.
There you go. That's awesome. Well, Dr. John Ritten, thank you so much for meeting with us this afternoon and being on the AgNext podcast. And for those that are listening, we always appreciate you tuning in. We hope that you will join us also on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, as well as check out our website. We always love to hear from our listeners, so if you want to send us a question or anything you're kind of curious that you'll hope we cover here at the AgNext podcast, you can email us at agnext.colostate.edu. And that's it for this episode.
Jared, just one last
Go
thing.
ahead.
I know you're not really active on social media, but how people can follow your work or
question.
find your work? You're pretty active on LinkedIn.
You have LinkedIn.
I do a little bit on LinkedIn. Yeah. Otherwise, follow AgNext and they'll link you to me.
There you go.
Perfect.
I'm anti-social media.
You're not.
I told John once, I was like, you need a shirt that says I'm anti-social media IRL. And he had to Google IRL because that's in real life. And I thought it was perfect, but we're working on that.
Anyway, thanks, John.
All right. Well, that will conclude our episode of the AgNext podcast, where we're always telling you about what's next from AgNext.